Building off the adventurous 1965 album Rubber Soul, the Beatles created Revolver, their seventh studio album, and their last recording project before retiring from performing live. A boundary-pushing collection of songs that many put on their list as one of the best Beatles albums ever. Just look at this song list: Taxman, Eleanore Rigby, Here, There, and Everywhere, Tomorrow Never Knows. Today we'll be showing you 10 very interesting facts about the Beatles album Revolver. None of Revolver was ever performed live, even though the album was released a few days before the Beatles began their last tour, which concluded in late August 1966. The band didn't think that the album could be properly executed live. Given the many technical innovations and studio-produced effects Revolver included, it would have been nearly impossible to replicate the songs with the technology during that time. In addition to the headache that was touring, this was another reason why the Beatles decided to stop touring. Their music was becoming more experimental, and they didn't want its inability to be performed on a stage to stop them from creating the music they wanted and stunt their growth. It was the last Beatles album changed for the North American market. Up through Revolver, Capitol Records, the band's US label, had always altered the UK versions of the Beatles albums. They would change the order of track listings, the songs included on albums, and could basically rework or create new albums out of existing songs. This is why there are so many albums in the early days of the Beatles. They are all Capitol releases and are basically compilations of songs, not actual albums. However, the Beatles demanded a change, and Revolver ended up being the last time this would be done, other than the slight exception of Magical Mystery Tour, meaning albums were more consistent across the board. The album wasn't always going to be called Revolver. Ringo suggested that it should be called After Geography, after the Rolling Stones' recent released album Aftermath. Other possible names were Four Side of the Circle, Beatles on Safari, Fat Man and Bobby and Abracadabra. The band ultimately decided to name the album Revolver after asking themselves, what does a record do? The answer, it revolves, so the album was a revolver. The backing vocals for the album's track, Yellow Submarine, were done by an array of notable guests. The Rolling Stones' Brian Jones not only sang background vocals, but contributed to some of the sound effects. Actress Marianne Faithfull, who is Mick Jagger's girlfriend, and model Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife, also sang background vocals. Additionally, many people who were part of the Beatles team did as well, including producer George Martin, manager Brian Epstein, sound engineer Geoff Emerick, and roadie Mal Evans. The album was released in the wake of a Beatles scandal. John Lennon's famous remark, "We're more popular than Jesus now," was receiving massive backlash around the world. People were demonstrating their outrage towards this comment by boycotting the Beatles and their music. All of this commotion was reaching a height just days before Revolver was released. This left Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, terrified of what would happen in terms of sales. However, despite John's controversial statement, Revolver was a massive success and topped the charts. The album cover was designed by KLAUS VOORMANN, a close friend of the Beatles. The Beatles met KLAUS while they were touring Hamburg in the early 60s. VOORMANN created a beautiful black and white psychedelic piece for the album's cover, which consisted of tiny pictures of the Beatles. Paul McCartney comments on KLAUS's cover art, saying, "He knew us well enough to capture us rather beautifully in the drawings. We were flattered. If you look close, you can see some familiar images." The iconic drumming on Revolver is in partial thanks to a four-neck sweater. The drums on Revolver are distinctly deeper than usual. Geoff Emerick, the Beatles sound engineer, explains why this is the case. He says, "I moved the bass drum microphone much closer to the drum than it had been before. There's an early picture of the Beatles wearing a woolen jumper with four necks. I stuffed that inside the drum to deaden the sound. Then we put the sound through Fairchild 600 valve limiters and compressors." Although this was an unconventional and rather untechnical method, many studios are said to have tried to replicate Ringo's drumming and the unique sound it created after hearing Revolver upon release. Revolver was the first time artificial double tracking was ever used. EMI Studio sound engineer Ken Townsend invented this technique for the purpose of Revolver. Artificial double tracking was used throughout Revolver to create unique sonics and influence many future rock classics, including Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. Revolver was the Beatles' first step towards creating psychedelic music. In fact, the last song of the album, Tomorrow Never Knows, has been called the first ever psychedelic recording. Although there were definitely some psychedelic bands and songs already in existence at the time of its release, Revolver and tracks like Tomorrow Never Knows were responsible for bringing the psychedelic genre into the general public's consciousness and made it more mainstream. Without the Beatles, it is possible that psychedelic music would have remained relatively unknown and confined to a small niche of music listeners, especially since the Beatles' psychedelic music influenced many other popular bands to follow in their footsteps. Revolver drastically changed the musical landscape the Beatles would cover for the rest of their time as a band. While many people claim that Rubber Soul was the album that marked the shift from their early music to their latter, Revolver seems to fit the criteria of this claim much more appropriately. Revolver introduced daring and cutting-edge sonics into the Beatles' music that were unimaginable to their audience and the general public up until that point. The music literally came out of left field. Revolver was also crucial in setting the stage for their Sgt. Pepper album, which took the world by storm and put psychedelic music front and center. Therefore, it is arguable that Revolver was not only one of the most important albums in the Beatles' career and discography, but of all time. Thanks for watching, we hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to leave your favorite Revolver fact in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and special thanks to contributing author Leah Robbins. Be sure to check out some of our other videos on music, such as Why Did Freddie Mercury Write Bohemian Rhapsody?, The Story Behind Toto's Africa, and if you're a Beatles fan, well, let's just say this is your channel. Thanks to the amazing patrons who keep this channel alive, and if you're into super underground music, then definitely check out the HollyHobs on Spotify, Apple Music, and everywhere music is streamed. If you want to be notified when new videos are out, at this point you'll have to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and pray that YouTube will recommend anything you actually might want to see. If you have an idea for a video, please be sure to leave a comment. See you next time.